Hello again, this is RT. Europe risks having a lost generation. That's the warning from Brussels as unemployment in the Eurozone hits the highest level so far in the history of the monetary union. And that's too as anger over austerity policy sweeps the EU, with the latest show of fury taking place in Athens. Let's talk about all this with Jerome Roos, get his thoughts on it. He's a researcher at the European University Institute. He's on the line now via Skype. Hi Jerome, evening to you. We see these continuing efforts, kind of Groundhog Day, isn't it, by Europe's policymakers with all these meetings, all these summits, yet at the same time we're hearing these continuing shocking figures. What do they tell us about the current state of the economy then?
Well, they tell us that the state of the economy is absolutely dire. And it tells us that what these leaders are trying to do through all these meetings and these summits that you mentioned is actually aggravating the situation. The austerity measures that are being imposed, the radical structural reforms, each of these things is actually aggravating the situation by undermining growth, by undermining investor confidence, and by unleashing a humanitarian tragedy. I mean, you mentioned the protests that are sort of spreading throughout the south of Europe right now. We had clashes in Madrid last week. We had clashes in Athens. We had hundreds of thousands of people protesting in Lisbon. And this is an indication, I think, that the factor that's been ignored throughout this crisis, the political factor, is now coming to the fore. And we're really going to see a big backlash there.
Is it a case of can't do or won't do to sort all this out?
Well, to an extent, I think that there are options available. It's just a question of what kind of options are being chosen. It's a very political choice. It's a question of the costs of adjustment. Who is going to bear the brunt of these costs of adjustment of this crisis? And so far, I don't think that European leaders are very willing to make lenders, to make private investors pay for the risky decisions they made in the lead up to the crisis.
Let's focus on Spain for a bit. It's got the highest jobless rate. 1 in 2 young people are out of work there. It's an awful picture. How is the country going to try to revive its economy with a whole generation now seeking a better life abroad, of course?
Well, clearly it can't continue the way it's going now. I think Spain would do very well to heed the lessons that were learned in the past decade from 3 other countries that took a radically different approach. Argentina, Ecuador and Iceland, each of which in the past 10 or 11 years repudiated part of their external debt and thereby freed up a lot of public funds to spend on social security, on reviving the economy, and actually bailing out homeowners, for example, as opposed to bailing out the banks that made such speculative bets in the mortgage industry. So I think that there are plenty of options available, but the most important thing is to prioritize the interests of the domestic population at large against the interests of foreign lenders.
What could be done about the unemployment? It does seem, doesn't it, the governments of the EU have been introducing these austerity measures, yes, to ease the debt burden, but the flip side is that they're pushing the unemployment higher and provoking recession by the looks of it. Have the EU leaders got it very wrong here, do you think?
Well, they've clearly got it very wrong from the perspective of trying to alleviate the debt burden of these countries, because what they're doing is actually making things worse. As I mentioned before, it's depressing growth. It's leading ultimately to an undermining of investor confidence. I mean, just today, Rajoy denied rumors that the bailout of Spain is coming this weekend. And as a result, financial markets collapsed once more. I think everything that they're trying to do ultimately is met by financial market panic. And what they're not seeing is that you cannot beat the financial markets unless you're willing to take a stand and say that we repudiate part of this debt and we move on and we set our own priorities.
Well, what you're saying there looks likely. The EU economics chief is now calling, we hear, on Spanish officials to accept an EU bailout to fix its finances, or at least try to. Why is Brussels pushing Madrid to do this? Why won't it allow the Spanish to decide for themselves?
Well, precisely because of what I said before. I think that if the Spanish got to decide for themselves, for instance, through a referendum, on whether or not to repay this debt, what you would see very quickly is that part of this debt would be repudiated. There is an enormous public outrage right now in Spain, as there is in Greece, as there is in Portugal. And if these people were allowed to decide on their own future, they would not choose the path that the EU is forcing them down right now. So what you're seeing is a repetition of what we've seen for the past 20 or 30 years, what's happened in the developing world, is that international lenders, through international institutions, actually cancel the sovereignty of nation states in order to ensure full repayment of the debt. And this is being repeated right now in Spain.
Thanks for your thoughts. Jerome Roos, researcher on the European debt crisis at the European University Institute in Florence. Appreciate it.